What happens when two of the world's largest economies, the US and Canada, go to war over trade? We're talking 25% tariffs on everything from steel to electricity exports, and that's just the beginning. In 2023, Canada's foreign direct investment jumped to an astounding $49.3 billion, while the US slaps tariffs on $30 billion worth of Canadian goods. But how does this affect you? Are you about to see skyrocketing prices at the gas pump, or maybe blackouts in key states like Michigan and New York? Stay tuned as we break down the biggest impacts of this escalating trade war. It all started when the Trump administration decided to impose a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, amounting to a staggering $30 billion worth of imports. The reasoning behind it? Trump's claim that these measures would help protect US jobs and industries. However, this decision sparked immediate retaliation. Just 2 days later, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government responded with tariffs of their own, targeting American products $30 billion worth. And they weren't stopping there. Trudeau even warned that if Trump's policies continued, they would escalate tariffs to $125 billion. Here's the real kicker. The US is Canada's largest trading partner, with approximately $683 billion in trade between the two countries every year. Canada has always been a key supplier for the US, from energy to raw materials, and these tariffs could disrupt this intricate web of trade and production. If you live in the US, especially near the border with Canada, you might start to feel the pinch at the grocery store or when buying automotive parts. Agricultural products, such as soybeans, dairy, and meats, worth around $2.8 billion annually, are now subject to higher prices due to Canadian tariffs. Auto parts, steel, and machinery, all things crucial to manufacturing, are now more expensive to import. So if you've noticed higher prices on everyday items like your car repair bills, food prices at your local supermarket, or construction materials, this is a direct consequence of the tariffs imposed. Now, here's where things get even more interesting and, frankly, risky. Ontario, one of Canada's biggest provinces, targeted something critical: electricity. In a move that could shock millions of Americans, Ontario imposed a 25% tariff on electricity exports to the US, which has profound implications. You might think, electricity? Why does this matter so much? Here's the thing. In 2014, the US imported about 58.4 terawatt-hours of electricity from Canada, about 10% of the US's total electricity imports. And of that, 95% came from hydroelectric power plants in Ontario and Quebec. That's critical energy infrastructure for states like Michigan, New York, and Minnesota. They rely heavily on Canadian energy to power industries, homes, and transportation systems. Ontario's tariffs on electricity exports could skyrocket costs for businesses and households across these regions. For example, states like Michigan received about 8 terawatt-hours of electricity from Canada in 2014, which accounted for 25% of Michigan's total electricity needs. If the price of that electricity increases by 25%, it could increase electricity bills by 10% for residents and businesses alike. But it doesn't stop there. If tensions rise further, Ontario has threatened to completely cut off electricity exports to the US, which could lead to rolling blackouts during peak demand in these states. If you're in the Midwest or Northeast of the US, chances are you felt the rising electricity bills already. A sudden increase in your energy costs, especially during the hot summer months, will hit hard. Rolling blackouts could also become a reality, meaning more power outages during hot weather or even during work hours. For US manufacturers, this could be a nightmare scenario. Production facilities could be forced to shut down temporarily because of energy shortages. Imagine your local factories halting production, leading to delays in deliveries for everything from cars to electronic devices. But Ontario didn't stop at energy. The Canadian government has been openly considering additional retaliatory measures to make the US feel the weight of its tariffs. For example, Ontario is considering canceling a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink, the satellite internet service that's been crucial for remote areas in Canada. That's a massive blow to the US tech industry. But it doesn't end there. Ontario has also suggested banning the sale of American alcohol in the LCBO stores, Canada's largest liquor retailer. The impact could be devastating for American beverage companies, especially those in border states like New York and Michigan, which heavily rely on the cross-border trade of alcohol. The U.S. exports over $3.48 billion worth of alcoholic beverages to Canada each year, and this ban could lead to a huge loss for American companies. For consumers in Canada, you might find that American brands and products start to disappear from store shelves, from liquor to food products, and are replaced with Canadian-made alternatives. For U.S. consumers, this could mean a scarcity of favorite products, or even higher prices, depending on how the situation escalates. So if your favorite American whiskey or canned goods are suddenly hard to find, this is why. Ontario's countermeasures are aggressive, but there's a catch. Ontario itself is highly reliant on U.S. trade. The province is the industrial hub of Canada, with key sectors like automotive manufacturing, steel production, and technology heavily dependent on trade with the U.S. This trade war could damage Ontario's economy severely. Ontario's GDP stands at about $1.19 trillion, and around 40% of that comes from exports to the U.S. The province's automotive sector alone is worth about $15 billion in exports annually. Disruptions in this trade flow could cause a serious recession in Ontario. To mitigate the damage, the Ontario government has set aside $40 billion in relief funds to help businesses, workers, and consumers. This includes tax breaks, payroll subsidies, and direct financial aid. But how long can Ontario sustain this trade war? If the conflict drags on, supply chains could be disrupted, production costs could rise, and many Canadian businesses might be left struggling to survive. For Canadians, especially those working in manufacturing or tech sectors, job insecurity might be a growing concern. If this trade war continues for months, companies could cut jobs or move production elsewhere to avoid the high costs of retaliatory tariffs. For businesses, supply chain disruptions could lead to delays in receiving products and parts from the U.S. It's easy to assume that the U.S. is self-sufficient when it comes to energy. After all, the country is a global energy powerhouse. However, the U.S. is heavily dependent on Canadian energy, particularly natural gas and electricity. Canada exports about 4.3 million barrels of oil per day, to the U.S., accounting for over 50% of the U.S.'s oil imports. The U.S. also imports about 10% of its electricity from Canada, worth around $2 billion per year. These imports are especially important for the northeastern and midwestern states. In recent years, the U.S. has raised tariffs on Canadian LNG liquefied natural gas by 10%, attempting to force Canada to shift its energy exports to the EU, where energy demand has skyrocketed due to the ongoing energy crisis in Europe. If this tariff war continues, the U.S. could face higher gasoline prices, soaring electricity costs, and even potential energy shortages, particularly in industries like automotive, steel, and high-tech manufacturing. The average American household could soon feel rising energy costs in the form of higher electricity bills, increased gasoline prices, and disrupted supply chains for many industries. If you live in an area that relies on Canadian power imports, energy disruptions could cause outages or higher utility costs. While the U.S. is grappling with these tariffs on Canadian energy, Canada is positioning itself as a major player in the global LNG market. The LNG Canada, backed by a $40 billion investment, is projected to produce up to 14 million tons per year of LNG once fully operational. This could significantly boost Canada's role as an alternative energy supplier to markets like Europe and Asia. Canada's geographical advantage, close proximity to both Europe and Asia, allows it to access diverse export channels, meaning it can adapt quickly to changing global energy demands. Now, while the U.S. and Canada's trade war may feel like a regional issue, the global ramifications cannot be ignored. With the U.S. and Canada being such critical players in the global economy, any significant changes in trade dynamics can send shockwaves through international markets. For instance, if tensions between the two countries lead to further tariff escalations, countries like Mexico, which also has strong trade relationships with both the U.S. and Canada, could be caught in the crossfire. This could result in a ripple effect, where Mexico becomes the new focus for global supply chains, particularly in industries like automobiles, agriculture, and electronics. Additionally, countries like China and India may start to play more prominent roles in filling the gaps left by disrupted North American trade. For example, China could step in to provide cheaper steel to both the US and Canada, while India may offer alternative textile supplies to replace disrupted shipments from the US. So, there you have it. This economic showdown between Canada and the US is more than just a trade war. It's a battle with the potential to change the landscape of global trade, energy, and industry. Whether you're a consumer feeling the effects in your daily purchases or someone working in industries impacted by this trade conflict, it's important to stay informed and aware of the shifting tides. The global economy is always evolving, and the choices made by Canada and the US now could have lasting impacts for generations to come. We've got to keep an eye on how this evolves, because if there's one thing for sure, the world is watching. Will Canada and the US come to an agreement, or will the trade tensions continue to rise? Only time will tell, but as consumers and citizens, we'll all feel the effects. Thanks for watching, and if you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more in-depth economic analysis. See you in the next one. S products, escalating the international tensions further. If Mexico joins forces with Canada and China, the Trump administration could face economic pressure from all sides. This could create a perfect storm, leading to widespread price hikes on everything from food to tech products to fuel. Now, let's take a deeper look at the impact these developments could have. It's not just about tariffs and trade wars. It's about the everyday products that we rely on. For instance, the US and Mexico are the largest trading partners for automotive parts, with billions of dollars worth of parts crossing the border daily. Mexico's labor market is a critical advantage for US companies looking to save on manufacturing costs. But what happens if tariffs increase, or worse, if parts are suddenly cut off? Car prices in the US could skyrocket, leading to more expensive vehicles for consumers and possible job losses in the automotive industry. This isn't just a corporate issue. It's an issue that touches all of us who drive or rely on the automotive sector. Let's break this down a bit further. The US-Mexico energy trade is another point of concern. In 2019, the US imported over 600,000 barrels of oil per day from Mexico, making it one of the US's largest suppliers. If Mexico follows through on its threat to cut off oil supplies, fuel prices in the US could soar, leading to higher costs for everything that relies on oil, including transportation and consumer goods. Even though the US has expanded its domestic shale oil production, Mexico's crude oil is still critical to US refineries, especially those located along the Texas-Mexico border. A shortage could lead to an inflationary shock across multiple sectors. The broader implication of all this goes beyond just fuel and cars. Inflation could spike across the board, as the US would be forced to find alternative sources for automotive parts, energy, and other goods that Mexico currently supplies. Consumers would feel the pinch with higher costs at the pump and for everyday goods. Additionally, US manufacturers may be forced to increase their prices to compensate for rising supply chain costs, further straining household budgets. But Mexico has its own economic vulnerabilities. Mexico's economy is deeply tied to exports, particularly to the US, which buys around 80% of Mexico's exports. If Mexico imposes tariffs or cuts off supply chains, they risk damaging their own economy as well. Mexican workers could face job losses, particularly in industries like automotive and electronics, if the trade war spirals out of control. Even with these risks, Mexico seems determined to stand firm, making it clear that they're willing to endure short-term losses to assert their position. So, what's at stake for both nations? Mutual loss seems likely, but both Mexico and the US are engaged in a high-stakes poker game, with both sides hoping the other will blink first. It's clear that neither country wants a full-blown trade war, but political pressures and the desire to appear tough on the global stage might drive both leaders to gamble with their economies. So, what does this all mean for you and me? If the US and Mexico do not resolve these tensions soon, we could see a serious disruption in our daily lives. From higher gas prices to increased costs for cars, electronics, and even food, the effects could be felt across the economy. But there's more at stake here than just money. The global economy is shifting, and this trade war could set the stage for bigger changes down the road. Will the US back down, or will Mexico's bold move force